All right, you're all set.
So let's go back to the No, should be you have managers book too. Go back. You might want to check. Anyway, it is in the syllabus. Let's see, who do I have? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 13. How are we doing on time? Let's see, it's time to, a couple minutes still.
Adam, did you get your phone?
Who's my group leader?
Yeah, I did. Right there.
How many in the class?
There's 18, but not here.
Yeah.
Oh,
15.
Ding the card.
So I've got another minute, so we'll wait.
Sorry.
Mike,
Golden shoulder.
and you want Tim.
I like your jacket. Just drunk.
No, this isn't going.
What, Air Force Ones are always perfect.
Yeah, especially with the pants that look like they were pulled up, being ready to be tie-dyed, and then they just come down.
Fashion, actually.
Mine wasn't even like low, like usually. Here we go.
106.
Where do you find it?
Yeah, it's in the, it's labeled introduction.
Angel, why do you look at all this stuff? That's literally my biggest thing. I literally have to work all the time. It does. I really have to stare at the screen for like 5 hours a day. Like, don't even. I'm sorry. You mother. I forgot to go to work today.
You're gonna get fired.
Okay, quickly, let's see, I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, missing 3.
Yeah.
Michael.
Here.
Good. Jean. Adam.
Right here.
Timothy. Thank you.
He's gonna be late.
Debbie's on her way. I think he's on an interview.
A lot of interviews, that's why.
Do we still have
She had an interview.
the same group on Monday this week, right? Yesterday we had the career fair. Some of the people stayed for interviews today?
Yeah.
Some of them could have gotten pushed.
All right, well, I'll check with that guys. Jean. G. Ashley.
Yep.
Darian. Nicholas.
There you
Nick is here.
You want here?
There, you're the one over.
Now I have everybody, huh?
Except for Debbie.
Okay. All right, I guess the first thing we'll talk about is, you did have the quiz after class. I see that everyone completed the quiz in the window. If you have any questions or concerns, you need to send me an email. But you all had the opportunity to see your grades, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You saw the answers were correct, you saw which ones were not correct.
Yes, sir.
Do you all know how to get my email?
Should be on syllabus.
How about you, Angela, figure it out?
Yep.
Okay.
It's in the postgrad.
Yeah. I mean, you should have on the portal, you should have access to the email of all faculty. You need to know how to do that should you want to contact anyone. And it may not be someone who you are actively taking a class with. You are welcome to contact any faculty member here if you have anything that you'd like to discuss with them, or they have some knowledge that you're interested in. That's one of the great advantages that we can afford you here at the school. Before we start, has anyone brought me a food story? Anything of great interest from our food world? Anything you've come across since we last met? Please, Ashley.
I thought this was interesting. I don't know if you know what Amazon Fresh is.
Yes.
But it's kind of like, it's like a big thing. They're shutting down, like fresh grocery delivery in at least 9 states. And it said that a lot of people are just gonna go back to buying it like in their grocery stores, like local grocery stores and stuff. And that it just like wasn't making enough profit for them to be like delivering it right to people's doorsteps.
Well, I think they're still in the process of figuring out their food delivery system, especially since the acquisition of Whole Foods. You know, I wonder, we can look at it, and I'm sure people are looking at it. An Amazon Fresh model, it's driven by convenience for the consumer, so it's market driven, it's for the customer. But in terms of our food system, what do you think? Is that a good idea? Is it better than having people go out to a brick and mortar and buy their food in maybe greater quantities? Go ahead.
Not necessarily, because I feel like it might be more costly in terms of like fuel and things, delivering it to an individual person's house. Since there are already a lot of like, grocery stores and different places that like have all those products, and now we have to like have open warehouses and all sorts of things that take all that like energy. And it's not really like changing the fact that there's grocery stores, it's just kind of like adding that in.
Yeah, it's all based on convenience, and I guess certainly it's something they need to look into. In urban areas, they have centers where they collect all the products and they distribute it from there. But if they have to air freight everything great distances, especially small orders, I'm not so sure that's a great model. The one thing though that's hopeful, and what we've seen with Amazon already in their growth, and the growth in things like Blue Apron, is we're going to see more and more of that convenience-driven shopping. So Amazon really has an opportunity, if their focus is a good sustainable model, whether it be on behalf of our environment or their social element, they have an opportunity to really do some good things based on the scale, the size of the business. Yeah, that's something we're going to have to pay attention to. Anybody else? Anything, please?
There's a woman in the Hudson Valley that's written a book on foraging. And my friend just got in contact with her, and I don't really know what's available in fall and winter as far as foraging, but we're just trying to get some more information and get educated on that. But she seems to be been doing it for a while.
Boy, I have not seen the book. Do you remember the name of the book or her name?
I mean, I can pull it up after class.
Yeah, you can do that. And then, of course, our library will be interested in getting a copy, so we'll all have access to it. Yeah, I would guess in the fall season, it'll be somewhat limited, but there are teas you can make from the bark of certain pines. There are some, like pheasantback mushrooms that dry down completely in the wintertime, but they still can be rehydrated. And then, of course, probably in wetland areas where you have springs that moderate temperature, there are probably certainly some greens and things. I mean, the Native American people certainly understood that really well. So, and like I said, there are a lot of chefs, especially as it relates to expensive things like some wild mushrooms that they learned to forage. They worked with professionals, mycological societies to get their skill base down, and it really helps offset some food costs if you're in an area where the opportunity exists. So, good. Before we start with today's lecture, we're going to talk about the production process or our food system with a focus on plants. So we'll be looking at fruits and vegetables and some grain crops. But before we do that, I want to kind of backtrack from last lecture. So we talked about sustainability. We just talked about it in real broad terms. What was the definition I gave you, or maybe yet one that you feel comfortable with that sums up what we try to accomplish with the term being sustainable? What are we really looking to do? Please.
Have something that won't deplete when we use it.
Okay, have something that does not deplete when we use it, certainly. Yeah, as far as natural resources go, we don't want to deplete our natural resources. And why is that? Please, Angela.
Finite.
Yeah, they're finite. Once they're gone, we don't have access to them. And in the context of many of the natural resources we use in our food system, it would be disruptive. What were some of those natural resources we talked about with respect to, that our food system really relies on? There's a number of them. Please.
Water.
Water. Yeah, plants. I mean, everything is largely water. And certainly in the plant growth cycle, which is the base, it's, the primary producers in our food system, they require water. Besides water, what do we need for plants?
Sunlight.
Yeah, light. Fortunately, we haven't figured out a way to screw that up.
Thank God.
We are limited in time, but in geological time, we've got a couple billion years left, so I guess we don't have to.
You don't have to worry.
No. But then, one of the things is, though, that's maybe the wrong approach, because I think a lot of the issues with our food system is when we say we don't worry, we're not worrying about our present condition. But remember, as a species, you have to be forward-looking. Now, certainly it's real difficult to look forward a billion years, but we ought to be able to look forward maybe a couple hundred. They'll be our direct descendants, maybe great-grandchildren. So besides the sun and water, what are some other resources? So the air, the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, oxygen. Plants take in carbon dioxide in the photosynthesis cycle and give off oxygen. Go ahead. Soil. Foundation of agriculture. So there's lots of components. And then in reality, with our model today, we use a lot of energy, fossil fuel energy, and that, of course, is finite. When I gave you the definition of sustainability, I talked about the triple bottom line and the three perspectives that people typically focus on when they talk to sustainability. And I said they're all related. It's a system. What were those three pillars? Go ahead.
Eco, social, and
Okay, remember I said if you remember it as the three P's, it's a little bit easier. Go ahead.
People, planet, profit.
Yeah, people, planet, profit. So we have social, we have our environment, and then we have our economic system. All right, with that understanding, and that as a basis, we're going to start building on that over these next couple of units. All right, today we're going to talk about, again, the food chain. Here's a picture. I guess we'll start with this. Pretty straightforward. If without looking at this, I'd ask you to draw the food supply chain for, in this case, this looks like apple production. How many nodes do you think you would have come up with? Here we have 13 nodes. A lot of it's a little hidden. I'm not sure any of you would have drawn it with 13 nodes. And I think that's largely the problem. Our food system it's remote. We're distanced. We don't really understand what it takes to bring foods to our table. Let me go through our introduction document. And again, everybody's reading these, right? In preparation for class. Another short one, just 2 or 3 pages. And then we'll build on it with our discussion of PowerPoint. So right off the top, I talk about a dramatic change in our food system, relatively recent, 150 years. You've heard the term the green revolution or industrialization of our food. And there's been some real market changes. 150 years ago, virtually everybody was involved in the procurement of their nutrition and energy. And today in the U.S., very few, 1%. How do we accomplish it? Well, we basically took advantage of capital, in this case, economic money, and we mechanized and exploited fossil fuels. So we no longer needed, whether it be animal or human inputs, energy inputs into the system. And not surprisingly, but we no longer source from our local community. Our food system is global, and that's brought good things. One thing is our choices are expansive, and we are not stuck within the concept of seasonality. And while they may seem to be good, there are consequences associated with where we are with respect to those. And I talked a little bit about here in terms of distancing, and you could have gone to this site, but there are many thousands of miles and a plate at a fine restaurant. In fact, in our PowerPoint today, I think I have a picture from Chicago restaurant where they show 16,000 miles on the plate. Pretty expansive. Another positive is food is cheap. We pay less of our disposable income for food, at least in the U.S., than we ever have. But people who have looked carefully at our food system recognize that the system as it exists today is not likely to be sustainable. And one of the big issues, it's driven by population, of course. Anybody click on this? Kind of cool. Shows a real-time count, as best I can, model of how our population is increasing. And remember, we said it increased really, really quickly from 1900 at 1.6 billion to till the year 2000, well over 6.5 billion to today, at least 7.4 billion. On day one, with the initial reading, we talked about where we think we are relative to the future and that we need to double our food production in the next 35 years to meet our population growth. That's kind of scary. And really, it's all based on changing diets, and in particular, going from less plant in the diet to more animal protein. It's probably worth stating, I don't know if we've talked about this in class, but when you think about your diet, even in the U.S., we still obtain the majority of our calories from plants. What is the number? What percent do we get from plants? Have I shared that with you yet? It's 70%, which means 30% come from animals. If you dig down, which you can, and you really want to understand where those calories are coming from plants, you'll see that half of them come from oils from plants or sweeteners from plants, things like, especially with corn, our high fructose corn syrup. So while it looks good from the outside that 70% of calories come from plants, the distribution within it is not necessarily so good. And then, of course, the big challenge in the modern food system, it is really found on the use of fossil fuels. What do we use them for? Well, we use them for, first of all, our synthetic fertilizers. We've got to get nitrogen out of the atmosphere, and that's a costly process. We use it in our production process, in our processing, transportation, refrigeration, and cooking. And the majority of our fuels today are not renewable fuels, so as a consequence, they are becoming limited. Number of graphs here, we'll look at these within our PowerPoint. And then, of course, one of the big issues is where does the dollar go? Where does that food dollar go? And a real market change since as late as the 1940s and 50s is very little of it gets to the producer. All the middlemen are collecting their share, and as a consequence, economically, the farming businesses are challenged. It is one of the reasons that under the economic pillar that we have government subsidies. If all the farmers decide it wasn't worth it, our food system will be broken, and we can't allow that to happen. All right, any comments so far? Anything from the introduction reading you didn't understand or want to know a little more about? Let's walk through this PowerPoint. There it is again, 13 nodes. Here's our production stage. Here's our consumption stage, either a home or a restaurant. Just 2 of the 13 nodes. These are the parts, certainly this part in particular, we are familiar with in the home or the restaurant. But we are very far removed. There are lots of steps between that actual production and our consumption. Here's a specific example. It's from Washington State, just looking at their apple supply chain. 12 nodes instead of 13, but it kind of walks you through in step fashion. First thing is we need to grow the apples. We need to produce them. Once they're produced, they need to be harvested. We need to pack out. So we wash, grade, box up, and we need to distribute. Now from here, there's a couple different paths, certainly. We can distribute directly to the end use as a fresh product. Again, what's the definition for a fresh product? Not processed. Or we can go through a processing phase. And within our food system today, much of our foods are processed. That's been one of the dramatic changes. I mean, if you think back to, if you can just kind of use your imagination and think back to your grandparents' time, what do you think were options for processed foods? Maybe they bought a bag of dry beans.
Cured meat.
Cured meats. And again, a process like that is potentially a very good process. This fermentation doesn't take energy. It uses natural bacteria. So sure, so they would have dried meat. And they may have just salted or used sun, depending where they were from. But certainly they could have used natural bacteria, like they've been doing in Europe forever, and create a lot of depth of flavor. So after it's processed, it's got to be repackaged again, and then it's got to get out to retail. Once it's moved from the retailer wholesale operation to either the chef or the consumer, there's preparation. In reality, you know, you can, on a breakfast bar, you can leave a fresh apple, but in general, you're gonna cook it, you're gonna store it for a length of time, you're gonna process it, and then it gets consumed. And then the last piece, of course, is whatever trim loss or whatever waste needs to be disposed of. And we will do a unit of waste, but the disposal piece is really problematic. So I want to introduce you to this concept of life cycle analysis. And the reason is because many of the statistics we have seen, and many of them that we will yet cover in this class, they are generated through this process. So what is life cycle analysis? Well, it's a relatively new approach to assessment. The best life cycle analyses are done in what we call a cradle-to-grave fashion, A to Z. We look at the very start of the food system, and we go to the very, very end. And what we do is we look at flows of matter through all those nodes. When I say matter and energy, certainly water, soil will be matter. Energy is the fossil fuel needed to run a process. While it typically is thought of as cradle to grave, it can also be done on what we call narrow boundaries. You don't have to look at it from node 1 to node 13. I can just look at node 1 and 2. Let's go back to the first picture here. Who might be interested in really understanding the energy flows just in nodes 1 and 2? Yeah.
Ecologists, biologists.
Well, certainly them, but maybe from an economic point of view, who might be interested?
The farmer.
Yeah, the farmer. That's his or her domain. And if they want to be efficient with respect to any of the three pillars, socially, environmentally, or economically, they would likely just do it at this small snapshot. But if you looked at the result, it would not represent by any means this overall 13 steps. So the tool is really a big deal. It was kind of pioneered for the environment. It's been a lot of use within our food system. And it is really it generated much of the data and the facts that we're going to look at throughout this course. So let's just do a little in-class experiment. We'll back up to a supply chain here, and we'll pick any particular node, and let's think of the resources that are consequential. So in growing, what are some inputs? Soil? Water?
Labor.
Labor. How about energy? Yeah, energy maybe for mowing the orchard or putting sprays on the trees, things like that. So there's a lot of inputs. What's an output? The primary output from the grower's perspective is what? Apples. But is that the only output? Go ahead.
Carbon dioxide.
Yeah, so there are significant impacts to the atmosphere. How about just the water that goes in? Does some of it come out maybe? Run off? So there could be significant consequences associated there. And the point really is just to get you thinking about a life cycle type of analyses where you actually, again, everything in, everything out, monitored, measured. And if you do that real well, you can understand the impacts associated with any process. All right, we talked about the green revolution, industrialization of food. What do we mean by it? Well, we treat our food much like we do an industrial process, any kind of manufacturing. And we look at things like mechanization, efficiency, speed, uniformity, standardization, low cost providers. Again, it has provided us with some good things, but it has, unfortunately, and for a group like yourselves, it should be easy for you to understand this and want to get back to the roots of it. It's separated us from our foods. When you go shopping and you buy a box of a processed food, you don't even spend a second thinking about everything that went into it. And it's not just you, it's virtually everyone. And what we're learning now is much of what we're doing doesn't make good ecological sense, and we do need to be scrutinizing our choice a little better and perhaps making better choices. One big change in agriculture today is monocropping. Monoculture is growing just a single species and is heavily reliant on fossil fuels and the inputs of water and fertilizer. Here's a definition of industrial agriculture by the Union of Concerned Scientists. Industrial agriculture views the farm as a factory with inputs and outputs. The goal is to increase yield and decrease costs of production, usually by exploiting economies of scale. So in other words, the larger I get, the more specialized I get, the more efficient I can be, and I can accept a smaller margin and still be profitable. What's the piece that's missing here that really has been a key piece of industrial agriculture, and it was a key term from last class? I'll give you a hint. It's the costs that are borne by all. In other words, we don't monetize them. We just put these costs out into, in the case of an environmental issue, out into our environment, and everybody pays the price. What was that term? No, but that would be an example, your carbon footprint. Was there a term externality we discussed? Externality, a cost borne by all. And I think I gave you some examples. I mean, we looked at erosion of soil as an externality associated with poor agricultural practices. Obesity is an externality associated with the subsidy of some processed foods. So there are a number of externalities that are costly to society, but they are separated from the true cost of your purchase of food. So what are some factors that led to our current system? Well, fertilizer really wasn't until after World War II, and we actually, from the technology associated with creating munitions, did we understand how to make fertilizer. Again, fossil fuel intensive. Here it is, not counting for the externalities. There's a high resource use, soil, water, energy. And there are significant environmental consequences. Artificially inexpensive fuel and water, that falls right under an externality. It's not cheap. We saw the true cost accounting video. Everybody remember that? No, yes? Yeah, and I think they did a nice job explaining how there is no such thing as cheap food. The price may be low, but again, all these consequences, these externalities, are adding up. So there are a number of subsidies, and the United States Department of Agriculture plays a huge role there. So again, just kind of stepping through history, here's a picture from 1950. Do you think that farmer had a good sense of that land? I would think so. Standing 6 inches over it every day, moving at about a quarter mile an hour. He knew his land about as good as anyone. How about this farmer today? He's probably got the rock music cranking. Maybe he's on auto. The tractor's being driven by a satellite, and he's just hanging out. Again, not just, what's that?
Use satellites to.
They do, yeah. Yeah, precision. Yep. And I'm guessing that system does have that because I've never seen, I think that is a 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-row plow. Wow. So it's been a real recent change. Here's a statistic for you. As late as 1950, there were still more animals on the farm in terms of labor than there were tractors. So oxen, horses. In 1900, half the population roughly worked on farms. Even in 1950, over 10% of us were directly involved in production, and today, again, less than 1%. 1930, 30% of the income went to food. As recent as 2014, it's under 10%. And you always have to keep the externalities in mind, because much of the reduction is that we're not monetizing some of those true costs. So here's a graphic from 1930 to today. And by a lot of measures, you would have to say that's a good thing. Why is it a good thing? It's not only a good thing, I think it's a bad thing. I guess you can tell me either one. But if you think it's a good thing, say why. Okay.
Good for like immediate consumers, because it means that less money to buy your food, but it may be bad, long term for consumers because of like health concerns and the way that affects like the economy particularly.
Okay, so 2 good points. That's how I want you to think. The fact that such a small amount of our disposable income goes to food, what does that mean we can do with the rest of our disposable income? Yeah, do whatever the heck we want with it, right? We can have hobbies, we can vacation, we can start businesses. It really has driven our economy, having the burden of food production and obtaining your energy needs. The fact that it's been so reduced, it has allowed us to be an entirely different civilization. It has probably, certainly been one of the precipitators of the population growth. But you've heard the expression, all good things come to an end, right? And that's what we're worried about. That's really the type of things that I'm asking you to consider as we move through this course.
I have a question.
Yeah.
From your personal, like, perspective, do you think that the number is going to continue declining? Or do you think it'll eventually, like, begin to increase again?
Okay, so the cost of food, will it continue to go down 10%? Now, there's two ways you can go down, certainly. One is significantly rising incomes.
Right.
And the other is continued efficient production. I think we probably, in terms of production and some future technology aside, like genetic engineering, I think there's not going to be a lot of gain there because we're going to be focused on feeding a large population of people in developing countries. So the question is, in a country like the United States, parts of the European Union, I mean, there is a good chance that with rising income, standard of life, it may go down. But I think it's unrealistic. I mean, what could be more? You're here at the Culinary Institute of America because this is your domain. You understand food. You're interested in food. And really what we're saying is, by this low price of food, that it's not that important. Things that are valuable, things that are important, typically you pay for, right? So I think we really need to get a new paradigm where we value our foods and we think about our foods, all aspects of it, much more than we do today. And there is a movement, certainly, different parts of the country. It may have started with the organic movement where they didn't like the way our food was produced. So there's a lot going on. And it's something that certainly as a chef you have to be aware of because depending where you set up shop, you will have a customer set that may be interested in those things. And if you're going to be successful, you'll have to understand their interests and needs so that you can satisfy that. Let's talk about some of the things under the heading of progress. Monoculture. Again, what did I say monoculture was? Single crop. Why would anybody grow a single crop? Yeah?
Easier to pollinate and take care of if it's all the same need.
Because you can get really efficient if you just do one thing and do it really well. What's the downside for a farmer who's in monoculture? Yeah.
Like the soil doesn't rotate, so the minerals aren't being.
Okay, really good. So in terms of soil, yeah, every plant has a nutrition profile, and if you continue to grow a single plant, it will deplete that soil, that nutrition. But how about from the farmer's economic point of view?
There's no biodiversity, so if they get hit with some sort of disease or their crop takes a hit, then the entire crop is at risk.
Okay, really good, and we'll do a lesson on biodiversity. I'm glad you mentioned that, but
Oversaturation of the market.
yeah, what if the price is much lower than you expected, and you don't get a positive return? I mean, it costs a lot of money to grow these crops. So historically, it's been kind of on a regular basis, farmers will have a bad year. And that bad year, because of their significant investment, puts them way down, and it takes many years to get back in the black. It's very precarious. Pesticide use. What's the definition of pesticide? Again,
Any chemical that kills insects or pests.
anything placed on a plant to alter its growth is a pesticide. And then within pesticides, in the case of an insect, we would call that pesticide an insecticide. If we want to kill a weed, we would call that an herbicide. Why are we using pesticides? Go ahead, Angela.
I actually read this one part of, I've read the book, and there's a large part of the third plate that talks about like a different perspective of like why we use pesticides. I don't know if this is like what is like the general like perspective, but they use pesticides because the soil doesn't have the nutrition or it's like not the right environment for the plant that people want to be growing there, and so the plant is not suited to the environment. So it's a lot more susceptible to take on different diseases and pests and things. So they argue that if the conditions were truly right for the plant, you wouldn't need pesticides because the plant would be so healthy because it's the most well suited to that environment that doesn't need anything.
That's a pretty good explanation. We probably won't cover that, but under biodiversity, that topic is called ecosystem and provisioning services. In other words, nature, plants have always grown, and there was nobody there to use pesticides. So there was a natural balance, if you will. When you, in particular, use monoculture, there is no natural balance. So there is no habitat for beneficial insects. There is no biodiversity genetically within the plant. So for things like pathogens and viruses, if one plant is affected, they're likely to all be affected. So there certainly are a number of reasons that we have to take extra care. The synthetic fertilizers, again, we've taken the fertility out of the soil. We have not been maintaining our soils. So what do? Well, we just amend it. That can't go on forever. We've talked about mechanization, again, back in 1950, as fewer tractors than animals in terms of labor on a farm, and today, virtually none. We have global markets. One of the things global markets affords us is certainly foods out of season and foods that aren't grown anywhere near our geography. Highly processed foods. What are the advantages typically? Why do people buy highly processed foods? They are cheap, but
Easier to work with.
yeah, convenience, certainly,
Longer shelf life.
and shelf life, absolutely. So those are the, and convenience is nice, and shelf life is nice. I mean, we will at some point, we talk about waste, we'll talk about the labeling, the sell by, the best by, the use by dates. That's a huge thing in our food system today. And in fact, most retailers, as they approach those dates, either deep discount or when it achieves the date, they toss it. That's a problematic. Worse yet, that's what consumers do. So if you bought something in bulk, thinking you were going to use them up, and then you go to your pantry and you didn't get to them, there's a venue for waste as well. Again, we're highly dependent on fossil fuels, and again, it's the mechanization of our system. And today we're doing a lot with genetic engineering. Most of our commodity crops, so it's our cotton, our corn, our soy, our canola, they are virtually well over 90% genetically engineered today. And there are very few genetically engineered varietals out there. So if you look across our system, everybody's growing exactly the same plant. A great example would be if we looked at rice across the planet. 100 years ago, it's estimated we grew maybe 18,000 varieties of rice. Today, 90% of our rice is under 10 varietals. Here's a consequence. While our population has been growing, look what has happened to the number of farms. They peaked in the 40s, and they've dropped off. But our food production has gone up. How do you think we accomplished that? Yeah.
They're bigger.
They got bigger. They got a lot bigger. And there's a term factory farm, and it just basically means farms that are in lockstep with the industrial model. So we see on the one hand the number of farms went down significantly, but the size of the farm on the other hand has gone up significantly. And then of course the efficiency within the farm, the productivity has gone way up as well. Here's some pictures of monoculture. On the left we have, I think that's a cherry orchard. And on the right we have some kind of grain, maybe barley. As far as you can see, only one thing. Now, from an economic model for the farmer in terms of economies of scale and specialization, it seems to make sense. How do we, and day 2, I think we talked about this, how do you think you can pollinate all those cherry trees when they all come into bloom basically on the same weekend? What do you need to do? Need what?
You need to have bees.
You need to, in fact, you do need insect pollinators. About 80% of our fruits and vegetables are pollinated by pollinators. So we need pollinators. But do you think nature ever evolved a pollination system to deal with a monoculture like that? No, because do you think in nature there was ever a situation where there's only one plant over a large area that all came into flower at the same time? Of course not. That's artificial. So we figured out how to deal with it, and what do? So we use bees, and what kind of bees? Yeah, we use honeybees. They're portable. We actually, just like we amend our soil with nutrient, we bring in hives and let the bees get active, and they accomplish that pollination. So bees, honeybees, are a pretty significant resource. And in fact, in the U.S., it's estimated the pollination is worth over $14 billion. Honeybee pollination. Wow. It's huge. I mean, if 80% of our fruits and vegetables rely on pollinators, and the majority of them are monoculture, we use honeybees, it's a huge value. Is anybody aware of any issues with honeybees? Go ahead.
Colony collapse disorder.
Yeah, colony collapse disorder. It's very difficult to maintain your hives of bees today. And that's a huge threat, again, based on the fact that our natural bees aren't abundant enough in that environment. One of the reasons not abundant enough is what I already stated. They had never had to evolve to deal with that circumstance. But the other reason is bees, natural pollinators, bees, wasps, they need habitat. Does it look like there's any habitat there? Any natural settings? Not at all. So they don't exist just because there's no place for them to breed and survive. Monoculture, single varietal. And the same thing here, if we're growing monoculture, we need to deal certainly with any problems. And here's a spray routine on a crop, probably spraying an insecticide. That farmer has a lot invested there. If a flight of insects comes in that are problematic, the only way we can deal with it, other than losing the crop, is to use a pesticide in a monoculture system. Here's a farmer that's injecting a liquid fertilizer.
This is not a thing.
No.
Sorry.
It's okay. And again, why in a natural setting, if you look at a non-managed environment, do they inject fertilizers in the ground? No, because nature naturally recycles nutrients. But in a system like this, where you're growing maybe a single monoculture year after year, or you're harvesting like you do with leafy greens, you're harvesting all the green growth and returning nothing back to the ground, little by little you're depleting it of its nutrients. And here's the big one, pumped water. This is basically the West. Why don't you see this in the East? Go ahead.
More water use.
Yeah, good rainfall east of Mississippi, 40, 60 inches a year. No rainfall, 15 to 25 a year, much to the west of the Great Plains. That's not enough to grow our crops. So what they do, these are all, it's called center pivot irrigation. There's a well that supports all of these, and these, by the way, are really large. There's 4 of them in a 2-mile square, just to give you the size of this. So you have a wellhead coming right up in the middle. You have a irrigation pipe that goes out in an arm that slowly walks around the diameter, and it allows the growth. In between, where you see the bright green, that's just what plants would look like if they didn't have water. What's one of the great concerns there when you look at that? all of you think. If we're pumping out of a well, will be something you might be worried about someday. Well, no, certainly, I mean, you do have issues when you're doing overhead sprinkling related to mildews and mold, but no.
The well will run out.
Yeah, what happens if the well runs out?
It's a lot of rain.
Well, remember, the reason they are using center pivot is they don't get enough rain. So they're using historical reserves of water. In this case, an aquifer. An aquifer is a water system deep in the earth, and they are pumping it dry. When it's dry, will they be growing crops in the Midwest? Not these same crops. It'll be a different model. We'll be looking for some of the ancient grasses that grew there, maybe some specific crops, certain grains that rely less on water, but we're going to really lose productivity. But that's where we're headed. And really one of the biggest trends has been how we buy our food. You know, until 1950, there really weren't anything but general stores anywhere in the country. The concept of a supermarket really was just starting to take off. And today we have retailers like Walmart. Walmart worldwide has more transactions than there are people on the planet. So global Walmart does over 8 billion transactions a year. Clearly, it's been a successful model. But again, when you walk into those doors, you aren't thinking about the supply chain. You're just thinking about the items that you're interested in. Processed foods. I mean, again, relatively new invention. Convenience, good shelf life, don't need skill. I mean, anybody can put a hungry man in a microwave and push a button. I mean, that's a real issue. You know, you've heard the term empty calories. Not all processed foods, but many. What do we mean by empty calorie? Well, it basically says go ahead.
Something that offers calories but no nutrients.
Yeah, so it provides us with energy, but it doesn't provide us with our nutrition. And of course, genetic engineering. There's a hokey example, that's not real. Somebody used a paintbrush, I'm sure, or nail polish. But genetically modified foods. A lot of controversy with genetically engineered foods. We're not going to get deep into it in this class. It basically is just using technology to create plants, animals, even potentially, that have the characteristics that we value. Not what nature values, not what the plant values, but what we value. So again, really driven to the humans. Let's just look at king corn. In the U.S., it is our largest crop. It is our #1 export by weight. Over 100 million acres of our ground in the continental U.S. are in corn production. And well over 90% of that is genetically engineered. How much of that do you think we eat? Directly?
Very little.
Very little. Maybe 9%. So we're using over 100 million acres to grow something that we don't even directly eat. If we don't eat it, what do we do with it? We feed animals, which we eat, right? But we remember there's a significant loss in energy when I feed a plant to an animal and then eat the animal. It's a factor of 10 at least. I can feed 10 people on the plants that I feed a cow, for example, that I could only feed one person. And we'll cover that when we do energy with trophic levels. But look at the production. In 1950, 40 bushels per acre. Today, 150 bushels per acre. How do we do it? What were some of the factors that allowed us to do that? Give you a hint, we talked about a couple of them. Yeah.
Genetically
GMO corn or even hybridization, so artificially selected traits in corn. In other words, corn, just in terms of big picture here, corn is was a grass. A grass with just small seeds, not unlike what you see with other grains. And through man's manipulation, not genetic engineering, but just by controlling the reproductive process, by taking the traits that we liked over thousands of years, we created basically a maize or corn very similar to what we have today. So yes, a big part of it was our ability to focus the artificial selection on production. Better yield was one of our targets. Now, from a chef's point of view, if you like low food costs, then production's a big deal. But if you like flavor, color, texture, those things we lost to a degree. So besides artificial selection, what else have we done to get that yield up? Yeah. Fertilizer's been huge, yeah. We can basically understand the nutrient requirement, artificially create principally nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, mix them, put them on the soil, and give the corn a full nutrient profile, allow it to grow maximally. And you can't do that forever. And the reason you can't do it forever is, well, one, potentially the resource of fuel to create those is becoming somewhat limited. But the other thing is, those fertilizers tend to be salts. So it adds salinity to soil, little by little by little. And plants can't grow in a salt soil. So little by little, we're destroying our soils with this approach. Here's a picture. So about equal parts. A third of corn is grown to feed animals, so our livestock. A third of corn goes to produce fuel for automobiles. They thought that was a great idea, right? Corn is renewable. If we can grow our fuel, we'll never be at risk of running out. Again, unless we run out of water in the plains or we destroy our soils. The real reason, though, for those of you who've never looked at it, the real reason we went to ethanol production wasn't so much that it was a renewable resource, it's that it burns a little cleaner, and in parts of the country there were some significant emission issues. So by putting a blend of 10 or 15%, you cut down on emissions, and that improved air quality and parts of the country where that's been a big issue. And it did accomplish that, but it's much more complicated than that. And how do we know? Well, if you're really interested in this, you can look at life cycle analysis of ethanol production, and you will be amazed what you find out. And then in terms of real food, most of it goes into binders and things like high fructose corn syrup. So that 100 million acres, very little of it winds up on our table. I use the term king corn, and this just shows that according to this, as corn use or production goes, so does our fertilizer use. They are mapped 1-to-1. And on a significant increase, although it does look to have tapered a little bit most recently, but some of that is because the whole U.S. economy flatlined from 2007 to about 2012. And I guess you're pretty aware of that. Hopefully you're also aware that the economy is doing pretty well right now, which is key for somebody that's going to graduate from college in another year or so in terms of having opportunity. And here's one that most people don't want to recognize, but it's a fact. In an industrialized system, there is no difference between food and petroleum. We graphed the two of them, the prices of food and the price of petroleum, across a 10-year period, and they're almost identical. And a big part of it is not just the tractor work, it's the amount of fuel needed to produce fertilizers. So if you gotta pay a ton for your fertilizer, you're gonna charge a ton for the food that you produce. And a lot of people don't think, and we have had issues in the past where we've had to ration fuels, or we've had conflicts that have impacted our ability to have unlimited fossil fuel. It will affect our food choices and our food prices. And again, you have this PowerPoint, but this just shows the rapid growth since late 90s to today in terms of some of the major crops and genetically engineered. They're virtually all genetically engineered, made in a laboratory. They have genes that did not exist naturally in those plants. So let's talk about the consequences then of industrialized food. We talked a little bit about soil loss. It can be erosion, it can be from degradation, from nutrient depletion. We've got significant water issues. Not only are we pumping water from deep reserves much faster than they can be recharged, but we are polluting our water. There's a lot of runoff. You know, if I'm a farmer and I put down nitrogen and phosphorus in particular, and I put down more than the plants will utilize, it's got to go somewhere. Please.
That's actually like a big issue in Ohio, like with our, like I live right on like the Great Lakes line.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we had like actually like an algae like bloom and everything, and so the water was like super unsafe for everyone to like swim in and drink, or like, yeah, because that's where we get like our water to drink and everything. So we had to be like really careful. So like a lot of communities like had to just like drink bottled water for like months because like the water was unsafe.
That's a huge impact, sure. I mean, your water source is no longer safe. Some of the algae have some phytotoxins they produce while they grow. Ohio's a big grain state, a lot of corn in Ohio. And what's happened is the waters run off the fields, they get into the small tributaries, the tributaries wind up in a major waterway. It's a huge issue in the Gulf of Mexico. The term actually is eutrophication. I'll cover it when we do water, but basically it's nutrient loading of waters that results in algal growth. And that's not the worst part. The worst part is after the algae grows, it dies. And when it dies, it takes all the oxygen out of the water to decompose. And if it takes all the oxygen out of the water, what does that mean? It kills all the aquatic life. So that affects our, in the case of the Gulf of Mexico, that affects our ability for the fishermen to bring in the prawn, to bring in the fish to market that we like in our restaurants. So these are huge issues directly related to our food system. Angela used the term biodiversity. We'll do a unit on it, but an element of biodiversity at the species level, it's easy to understand, is extinction. A species is there or it's not. Agriculture, especially in developing nations, where they do a lot of deforestation, is it is the leading cause of extinctions planet-wide, agriculture. And of course, we do have a changing climate. There's a lot of reasons, but we can, in terms of the carbon footprint of agriculture, it's very high. And I think the worst piece, though, and this is why I wanted to teach this class and why I want to spend time with you, is because of our industrialized system, there is no personal connection any longer with our foods. And historically, and still in parts of the world, food is the basis for your culture. And we know that. We see a lot of the foods we're really interested in from different places. That's eroding, and that can't be a good thing. Here's a pretty simplified graphic that just talks about the distance by truck to a Chicago terminal market, and it lists a couple of common items on the left. And you can see grapes, on average, the grapes that show up in the terminal market could travel over 2,000 miles. Pumpkins in the fall season, maybe not so far. Same thing with apples. Now, Michigan's a big state. of apple production. It's number 3 in the nation in apple production. That's pretty close, but the vast majority of apples come from Washington State, so it's a long distance. And here, this is some data for Chicago as well. And here's the plate: tilapia, salad greens, tomato, herbs, strawberry for dessert. 16,000 food miles on that plate. I mean, you're sharp people. You're in the food industry. How many would have guessed that? But now that you know it, you can use your mind to think of all the implications associated with that. One thing that's really easy to grasp is just the concept of food miles and the transportation. It has to cost something to bring that there, right? And it does. It turns out, and that was something we grabbed on really early. It was one of the reasons I think the local movement got a lot of momentum. But our food system is so broken that transportation and the food mile cost is really relatively a small component. All right, let's define organic. Because there are some options out there, right? And organic has been promoted pretty significantly as being an approach to fundamentally improve our food system. So here's your definition. Go ahead, read it. And by the way, organic in the U.S. is a legal definition. An act of Congress passed the National Organic Practice Standard, and if you promote something as being organic, you have to follow that certification or you are civilly liable. So it's a law. A little more complicated than this. Go ahead.
You have to pay for it also.
Okay. The question is, you have to pay for the certification? When it first rolled out, there was third-party verification, and you basically did have to pay a fee to have people come and essentially audit to make sure. Today, maybe not so much, but you do have to, should you be challenged, you do have to be able to show and verify your practices are consistent. The easiest way to think about organic is pretty straightforward. That organic growers cannot use any man-made fertilizers, any man-made pesticides. They are not allowed to use that genetically engineered seed. Those are the 3 big hitters for organic. Is it?
Are organic monocultures still popular?
Okay, her question is, are organic monocultures an option? And it turns out they are. And it's large, and it's what it is, it's our large producers that have organic divisions. I mean, the original intent with organic was it would be more of a diversified, small-scale, community-based type of agriculture system. But because it was so successful, to a degree, has been co-opted by large organizations, and they are able to meet the letter of the law using still an industrialized system. So it doesn't necessarily mean that by when you purchase organic, who you're purchasing it from, that you are dealing with a new food system model. In terms of animal proteins, that's the class next week, but in addition, they can't have any antibiotic or hormones in animal proteins. Yes?
Can you explain the difference between organic and biodynamic?
Okay, the question is, and there's another model out there, it's called biodynamic. Biodynamic, probably, and I've looked at both. In fact, there's a pretty successful biodynamic farm here in the Hudson Valley called Hawthorne Valley. A number of students have gone out to visit it. It's they have a school associated with it. They have a dairy now. They've been in business for about 25 years. Biodynamic is kind of, and I'm not sure, certainly there is not a government standard for biodynamic, so it's kind of a standard from within. It's probably, it certainly exceeds that of organic. It's more of a holistic approach where you basically consider, especially from an environmental point of view, carefully, conceptually, how you configure your farm. So a lot of biodynamic have a permaculture component, which means that they grow in the same place. They grow, berries, tree fruit, things like this. So it isn't a field that they go in and clear every year and start anew. It's an integrated agriculture, if you will. But biodynamic is, they do a lot with the calendar, the seasons, the moon cycles. It's almost like a religious way of farming. Certainly you can read about it, or you can visit Thorpe on Vale Farm. When they first started, they started at the same time I started farming. I spent a lot of time up there, mostly helping them out, because the people that started farming didn't have a lot of farming experience. And they did some pretty crazy things. I don't want to really knock them, but they spent a lot of time doing things with no science behind it. But I'm kind of okay with that, because I think one of the problems, and again, I think early in this we talked about it, we view agriculture as a science today versus as a natural process, and that isn't a good idea. So on the one hand, biodynamic at least is going back to the natural roots of farming. So why is organic good? Well, we've got some reasons here, but how many people in the classroom like organic? No, just one?
Well, it may depend.
I know a lot of people that will try to sound important by saying that they prefer organic. But I personally it's not my number one priority, but I have a lot of friends back at home that like to do it.
Why? Why do you think they are motivated to purchase organic?
I know, my mom likes it because Dr. Oz has suggested, and then all of a sudden it's like the word of God. And then I also have friends that think they're just being healthier that way, and that they're like the next generation, like they're the best for it. It's
Yep.
I think it's a lot of ego. I think it's a lot of pride.
Okay, Stephanie?
I think they do because it's that
It's what?
you could afford it.
Well, I think that's one of the big issues.
Than other.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big issues with organic. They're typically, and especially small scale, because we don't have the standardization, we don't have economies of scale, there is a premium often associated with organic. In other words, it costs more. And which means not all people have equal access, because not everybody is economically on the same plateau, right? So that is a piece of it. Yep, go ahead.
Sometimes plants without pesticides and fertilizers are crap. And so organic's not necessarily the hype that it should be.
I agree. Any other thoughts on organic? Certainly you purchased it, certainly you thought about it. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be a chef, if you're going to have a restaurant, you have to consider, would you purchase organic? Would you maybe have organic offerings on the menu?
I think that sometimes, when I go to the grocery store, I grew up always going to the grocery store with my mom, so I would always be looking at the produce, and a lot of times I would notice that the organic vegetables and fruits were better, or you're just my mom would teach me how to look at what's the best fruit, listen to the sound and the smell and everything.
Yep.
And sometimes it wouldn't match up, but a lot of times I would see that the organic ones were better quality. But I think that if I had to pick between buying only things that were organic from large conglomerates, or going to farmers markets and buying things that come from the immediate community, I definitely prioritize buying things that are local.
That's a big question, say local versus organic. Go ahead.
I think the reason why people would buy organic is just more of the certification saying that it is organic, other than not knowing what the animal has.
Yeah, but they must have a motivation, especially if they're going to pay more. So why are they doing it? What do they think they're getting from buying it?
I think they're being healthier.
Healthy is a huge piece, yeah. And there's one other component.
I think there's a lot of scaremongering that about GMOs, pesticides. So there's a lot of debate as to the implications on consumers' health. So I think a lot of people try to buy organic because they're there's the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen.
Right.
Ones crops and it's harder to like get the pesticides off of it or something. And then like the clean are like, you know, they have like thicker like peels or whatever. You don't eat the peels, so that comes off, so it's safer to eat that and it's not organic. So I think there's a lot of with your money that goes into like.
Yeah, I mean, and you said health, but health really can break out into two components. One can be nutrition, and the other can be safety. And it turns out those are the primary reasons that people purchase organic. They think it's healthier, they think it's safer. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's kind of like a trend too, sort of like the whole gluten-free thing, how that like took off. And I think people, like, once they started seeing, like, there's like organic toilet paper, and people like buy that. Like, is that really like a thing that people like really are concerned about, or is it more of just like, oh, let's go organic, oh, let's go gluten-free? Like, I think it's really like a trend, and like some people care about it, some people don't.
Yeah. Well, I think what's happening now is, you know, some of these issues we're starting to talk about in this class, people have a little bit of an awareness, and they're motivated to try to do something good, but they're conflicted because they don't have the information they need. But organic, again, has a specific definition, and it does do some really good things. I don't believe there's evidence that it's safer. I don't believe it's necessarily healthier, but it does do good things. And in particular, the one thing it does, again, because we can't use those synthetic fertilizers, is organic farmers, to be productive, have to be good stewards and managers of their soil. Our soil across the nation is being depleted very quickly, and it's the organic farmers that are saving the soils. On a small scale, albeit, but definitely they're saving the soils. So soil is huge. So if you're buying organic, you should feel good, because even if it's large corporation, they are doing practices that are much, much better for the soil. Another piece that's huge has to do with our farm workers, our laborers. Many of them are here on visas, they're immigrant laborers. Organic pesticides, and by the way, I said organic growers don't use synthetic pesticides. They do use pesticides, okay, but they use naturally occurring ones. Those pesticides, in general, have much lower toxicity to mammals, people. So it is safer for farm workers in the field. There's been, forever since we went in using synthetic pesticides, especially the organophosphates, there's been a lot of health issues, cancers, a number of significant ailments associated with being in the fields amongst farm workers. So it protects your soil, provides better farm work for safety, and it helps with biodiversity. Even in the case where the organic grower is growing a monoculture, the diversity of the soil, the life in the soil, is much stronger than in an industrial agricultural system. So those are all very good things to do. Now, the fact of the matter is, in our food system today, only just about 5% of our food and beverage is organic. So it's still just a really small piece of the market. And kind of getting back to Stephanie's point, where, you know, she said people like to buy just to show that they're able, they have the money to do it. I think if we really look under the cover organic and do believe and agree that it isn't healthier and it's not safer, then I think that's probably a good thing, because wouldn't it be really bad if in fact it was healthier and safer, but you had to be rich to buy it? So that would mean that the average person, or especially the disadvantaged people, are having a different nutrition profile and a safety profile. That doesn't seem to be the case. So, and some other things we typically see with organic is less mechanization. So if you're going to use less mechanization, you still have to get things done, so you're going to have more people involved. So there's a human element. And by the way, human labor is renewable. And we're a renewable resource, and certainly our energy comes from our food. Many of them grow lots of different crops, so they have diverse. That helps with biodiversity, but it also helps with them in the marketplace. If something isn't selling for a good price, then maybe they have something else. It turns out that 80% of all organic foods are sold within 60 miles of the farm. I think that's huge. That'll tie into our local discussion. And what that really enables then is a farmer-consumer relationship. Remember I said we lost the personal relationship with food? Well, in organic models, since so many of them market close to where they're produced, now all of a sudden you have the ability at least to talk with the producers in that food system. I gave you a link here. There's a number of good links that tell you more detail if you're interested in organic. It is more expensive because it lacks economies of scale and specialization. Again, more labor than mechanization. And maybe lower yields. You know, sometimes the lower yields are just because they don't have the fertility of the soil they need, but often the lower yields have to do with the genetics of the plant. They're growing different varieties. And that's kind of the secret that I think every chef should know, but many don't. Our large producers, their interest when they select varietals to plant doesn't really have a whole lot to do with you, the chef. It has more to do with, does my product have good shelf life, and can I ship it across the country? Because that's the name of their game, right? If it doesn't ship well, and it doesn't have shelf life, they're not going to be successful. On the other hand, a small grower, organic or otherwise, that's selling locally, they're not real focused on shipping and shelf life because it's not part of their business model. So instead of being focused on shipping and shelf life, what do you think they're thinking about? What would be important to you in a fruit or vegetable? Flavor. Okay, they're thinking about flavor. What else? Appearance, so color, size, shape. All the things that you, the chef, or you, the consumer, want, those are the priorities for these small growers. And in fact, that has been one of the things that I think has allowed the organic market to grow to as much as 5% and continue to grow in double digits. So we're going to see more and more of this. So we can contrast our industrialized system to a different model, maybe an organic model. Before I do that, let's just talk about local. When I asked how many people really felt strong about organic, I had maybe 2 of you. In terms of local, how many of you feel strong about local? I'm surprised you don't have your hands up. So, since you did put your hand up, what don't you like about local? I think neither one of you put your hands up. You? What don't you like about local? Oh, you did put your hand up, sorry. I know you did it. You don't like local? Maybe? All right, we'll do it the easy way then. Those of you that did say you like local, what's special about local? Go ahead. Okay, very good. Yeah, so if I spend $1 on my community, it gets a multiplying effect, and it makes the economic vitality of my community stronger. Another reason. Go ahead.
Not that many miles on the product.
Okay, so even if you're just focused on food miles, if it comes from 10 miles away, it's got to be better than coming from 1,000 miles away from a fuel cost.
Right.
So, true enough, go ahead.
You can, like, if you're really close, like, if you have, like, a restaurant and you're close with, like, the farmers, you can get exactly what you want, like, if you're buying enough from them.
I really like that one. That's the chef-farmer relationship. Remember on day 3 we talked about selection and degree of maturity when the product is perfect for your intended use? If you can talk to the farmer, the guy who's actually producing it, the guy or girl, you can tell them, this is exactly how I want it. And they can meet your specifications completely. You can't get that with a remote producer. No.
You can find products in farmers markets that you cannot find over
Okay. That's always a good thing. Variety, new choice. That kind of surprises me, though, because within our system in general, I think you can find more things in grocery stores than you can find in farmers markets.
More like abstract things, like more things that like the standard home cook would be using, because they'd be too intimidated.
Well, certainly within varietals, and I've already told you that's the case, because the small growers go to things that they know. Yeah, so that it can be if you have a real, a grower who's really out there and trying to.
When have you seen a watermelon or radish in a grocery store?
Or like edible flowers.
Well, it depends on the grocery store, but you're right, your standard market, you're not gonna do them. You were saying?
Edible flowers.
Edible flowers.
specialty herbs, like a lot of farmers markets have like little like artisan stands, so like they have like artisan cheeses and honey,
Okay, good.
ciders.
Now, here's a question. For those specialty things that you typically won't see in a market, the nice thing about an organic or the relationship on a local scale is it could be it's the farmer who's bringing that to market to create a niche opportunity where there's no competition, but it could also be what? It could be from the other side of the equation. It could be the consumer, the chef, is saying because he has a relationship, well, I wish you'd grow this, the watermelon radish, the black radish or something I can't get a market. So that's the way the system's supposed to work. You have influence. And there are communities where people might be more interested in the environment. They like the fact that you fertilize your fields with animal waste because you raise pigs, for example, instead of using fertilizer. It could be in a different part of the country, they like the fact that they know all the people that work for you and you treat them really well. There are no labor issues, things like this. That's what we need to get back in our agriculture or within our supply chain, is that relationship between consumers and all parts of the supply chain. And I think I've already mentioned, but local is, there is no legal definition, so it's probably whatever you want it to be. Okay, here's some pictures. Back to our cherry orchard on the left, and a very diversified farm on the right. Let's say I have a pest like a cabbage moth. In that picture, there's only one brassica, so I don't have to worry about losing my whole field. Worst case, I'm going to have some trouble there with they look like maybe red cabbages. Here I have my industrial farmer spraying an insecticide, and here I have in an organic, maybe biodynamic farm, I have them practicing integrated pest management using a beneficial insect. The ladybugs feed on the larvae of lots of the damaging insects. So in nature, what there is, there's balance, right? It wouldn't serve us well in nature if a plant would get destroyed by something, because that would be the end of that plant. So nature has provided beneficials that keep those pests in check, if you will. So the ladybugs are huge. By the way, the state bug for New York is a ladybug, and it's a 9-spotted ladybug. And until about 4 years ago, it was thought that they had gone extinct. The vast majority of ladybugs today are from Asia. They've come in with produce that's shipped in on boats and things. And unfortunately, they are not as effective as beneficial insects as the 9-spotted. So I know you all have cell phones and I getting late in the year, but if you see a dark red ladybug with a big hump and there's 9 spots on it, take a picture. There's lots of people in the country. You can start with Cornell that would be really happy to see that picture. Citizen Science, it's called. And it was actually the first one found in the Northeast in over 15 years was a 9-year-old girl in Maryland with her cell phone. Her teacher told her there were no 9-spotted ladybugs, and she found one the same day. And it was a big news story. Pretty exciting. Yeah, you can inject synthetic fertilizers right into your plants, or what we've always done is just cycle existing nutrient. And here on the right-hand side, we have some animal waste on some kind of animal protein production farm. In terms of shopping, you can shop at a little farm stand or some kind of local business, or you can go back to your superstore. And in terms of your purchases, you can buy fresh or you can buy processed. Now, I think we've already established that as chefs, you're going to be biased towards fresh ingredients whenever possible. allowing you the entire manipulation, total control over how that ingredient is treated. On the left, I have the depiction of the genetically engineered food, and on the right, here's an example of what we call heirloom plants. These are heirloom tomatoes, and heirlooms are, in the case of this, the botanical fruit that has had significantly less artificial manipulation than most hybrids today. They're much more true to some of the historical tomatoes that were available in the marketplace. How many people are familiar with heirloom tomatoes? Do you ever have a really great one? Was it in season? Did it come from nearby? Has anybody had one that wasn't in season and did not come from nearby? No, I wouldn't think so. They are pretty special. What did you like about it?
The different colors were cool. Like, we used them to, like, the varying colors.
Yeah, so I mean, just presentation. There's a lot more, it's not just your red or your orange, there's a lot of colors here. So color for presentation. What else you like about it?
I like that they were juicy but not too seedy.
Juicy but not too seedy.
Yeah, full seed, I should say.
And I'm not sure, but some of them may be less fruitful. I think it had to do with pollination. What else? I mean, the real reason, no one has said yet. Well, they are fresh, certainly. If we use them in the natural state, in the process.
I think they're sweeter, too.
It's funny, a lot of people say they're sweeter. I used to sell a lot of heirloom tomatoes. And we go, I love the heirloom tomatoes, they're really sweet. In general, they're not sweeter. They're actually more acidic. They're high acid, most of them. That's the greens, the blacks, the reds. And what that does, with that acidity, it is a salt. It's a glutamic acid. So it triggers your umami. They're crazy flavorful. They're much tastier. And people without a good palate say it's sweet. But there are some varieties that are sweet, certainly. Some of the yellows can be sweet. Yeah, it's all about flavor. They're really special. How much do you think you pay for 1 pound? Perfect. The best you ever had for your restaurant. Guess it depends on the type of restaurant and how you're going to present it, right? I can tell you for a fact, I have seen chefs pay $20 for a single heirloom tomato.
No.
I have.
Why did they do that?
Because it's the best ingredient they could possibly ever get. And that's what they're all about. Now, but that tomato was well over a pound, if that helps. But they're still paying over $10 a pound.
How big was the tomato?
I've seen heirloom tomatoes 2 pounds.
A single tomato?
Sure. A lot of heirloom tomatoes over a pound. Yeah, if you get a chance and the season's winding down, but maybe next spring get down to New York, go to Union Square, if you're still around. I mean, how many people have been to Union Square Farmers Market? A couple of you. If you get there late in the season, this year was a slow year, maybe next year will be a little better. Usually certainly by the middle of August, there's a couple of growers down there that specialize in heirloom tomatoes. And I know both of them pretty well. One's from Pennsylvania, one's from the Hudson Valley. On a good day in that 5-hour market, they sell $20,000 of tomatoes. One vendor in the market. Now, some of those sales are on the front end and tail end. When the chefs have ordered them on the phone, they stop by to pick up their cases. But that's how precious they are. Go ahead.
So do you think in that kind of setting, do farmers make more of a profit? Or do you think that it's just...
No, they're making good money on them because they got something really special. There is no competition unless it's local. Somebody else has done the same job. And it's a very short season. And if they're lucky, maybe it's 8 weeks, maybe 10 in a good year. It's over. Who looked at this sustainable agriculture, the basics? Anybody? Did you write down any questions, any comments from that? That's a pretty good guide. It's a lot of pages, but you can selectively to the index, go to anything you're interested in. And it just gives you a real good overview of what challenges and what practices producers make on the farm. And again, if you're really going to understand the food system, you're going to have to build up your knowledge of every element all the way through. And I've already reminded you that as a chef, by purchasing fresh, by connecting with the producer, you're right there, you're doing some good things. You're cutting out the processing, the packaging, and you're returning more of your food dollar directly to the producer. And that allows the producers to be flexible, maybe make some better decisions, reorganize their business. I had said before, and I think I told you this last week, when we were talking about fertilizers, the quote from Holland, where the saying is, fertilizer is good for the father, bad for the son. Did I share that with you last week? Have you heard that before? Fertilizer, good for the father, bad for the son. So they understand it. It's just that in a challenging environment, we have a very small margin. Sometimes you got to do what you have to do to make a buck. And we shouldn't force our producers to be in that position. And I'm hoping, a group like you, who will be knowledgeable about the industry and will be participating in the industry, can help with that movement. By the way, I mentioned Holland. Would it surprise you that in terms of agricultural fresh exports, that the Netherlands are number 2 in the world on a dollar basis? Did you hear what I said? Does that surprise you? That's a pretty small country. And don't they have sea water all around them? They're number 2 to the United States, by the way. Fruits and vegetables, go ahead.
Did you say by the dollar?
Dollar amount. Not total volume, but dollar amount.
Okay, so they're just like charging, like.
But they're getting it too, obviously, for somebody's paying. But they grow higher value crops, and they do a really good job of growing it. They have a very efficient system. There's a lot of people looking at it critically with life cycle analysis to see if it has much less impact on our world than conventional. But it's relatively a new revelation that the Netherlands on a dollar basis have the second highest. All right, let me tell you what we're doing next class. You're going to have some reading again, day 6. The class is very similar to today, with the exception the focus is on animal proteins. So today was most about plants. Next week will be about animal proteins and the significant trends within that area. All right, any questions? See everybody Thursday.